If you've been following the channel for a while, you know we have a soft spot for weird islands. We've already shown you places where everything seems normal until you take a closer look. We've already taken you to Diego Garcia, that secret island where an entire population simply disappeared from official maps. We've also talked about the famous Snake Island in Brazil, where one wrong step can turn you into a statistic. We even visited the cursed island of Poveglia, Italy, known as the official address of the plague. Not to mention Doll Island in Mexico, which seems to have sprung directly from the nightmare of some psychopathic craftsman. And if that wasn't enough, we recently went to Santa Cruz del Islote Island, a tiny piece of the Caribbean so crowded that it would make Tokyo seem peaceful. There are too many people in too little space. If you missed any of these videos, it's worth binge-watching them later. I'll leave the links in the description. But today's destination is the complete opposite. If there's a lack of space in Santa Cruz, here there's plenty. And yet, almost no one stays. We're talking about an island with no hospital, where there are more cows than people, and where, officially, no one is born. That's right, no one. How is it possible to maintain a community like this? Who are the people who live in such a remote place? What do they do when they get sick? And why choose to live where almost everyone else has decided to leave? That's what you're about to find out. In today's Bello Mundo, you'll discover Corvo Island, one of the most curious and complex places you've ever heard of. Number 1. Location and general information. Portugal always seems to seduce the whole world. It's that country that lives in the collective imagination. Mild climate, good food, friendly people, ancient cities, and people everywhere. But far from the hustle and bustle of the capitals, there is a little piece of Portugal that doesn't fit in with any of that. To give you an idea, we are talking about an island just over 850 miles long. In other words, smaller than the area of Dubai Airport. However, despite its tiny size, the island has one of the most impressive geographies in the Atlantic. Right in the center is Caldeirão, a gigantic volcanic crater that dominates the top of the island. Inside, you will find lagoons, small hills, nature trails, and absolute silence that seems to disconnect the planet for a few moments. This is the postcard image of Corvo, one of the most photographed places in the Azores. Around Caldeirão, the entire island seems to have been shaped by hand. The slopes are covered with dark green vegetation, interrupted by stone walls that divide pastures and create that wild but organized island look. On clear days, you can see the neighboring island on the horizon. On foggy days, the island disappears into layers of cloud, as if swallowed by the sea itself. Another striking feature are the cliffs, especially in the north. These are towering rock walls, formed by centuries of volcanic activity and erosion, which plunge straight into the Atlantic. The view from the lookouts is incredible. It's the kind of landscape that makes you immediately understand why this place has always been so difficult to populate. The climate matches this dramatic geography. In winter, temperatures range between 50 and 53 degrees Fahrenheit, with strong winds and gray skies. In summer, it hardly ever exceeds 77 degrees. No Portuguese heat wave here. The weather changes in an instant, and it rules more than any calendar. And when you put it all together, cliffs, craters, viewpoints, fog, rough seas, and a people who insist on living in this corner of the world, you begin to understand why this island is so different from everything else Portugal usually shows. But where did this community come from? Who chose to live in this remote corner of the Atlantic? You're about to find out. Number 2. Origins and history. While mainland Portugal grew connected to ports, trade, and expanding cities, here everything happened at a slow pace. The first records mention Portuguese navigators arriving in the 15th century during their great voyages across the Atlantic. Finding the island was one thing, managing to live on it was another. The sea was rough, the wind relentless, the terrain sloped, and there was no natural harbor. It was like trying to live on a lookout surrounded by rough waters. For this reason, settlement only really began in the 16th century. Even so, the island remained a challenge. For a long time, it served as a refuge for ships fleeing storms and attacks at sea. Pirates and privateers roamed the region and, depending on the year, were either unexpected allies or direct threats to the residents. One of the most striking episodes of this period is the attack by Bavarian pirates in the year 1632. At the time, the island had just over 200 inhabitants and, according to local tradition, everyone joined forces to defend the territory. Legend has it that Our Lady of Miracles protected the village, returning 7 bullets for every enemy shot. This episode is so famous that it became part of the book A Ilha do Corvo que Venceu os Piratas, The Island of the Raven That Defeated the Pirates, by Portuguese author José Rui. Over the centuries, the community grew stronger. Without rapid growth or large waves of immigration, life was sustained by fishing, small plantations, and animal husbandry. Almost everything that was not produced there arrived by boat, from tools to food. The difficulty of access shaped another permanent feature. News arrives late here. Things that were already common on the mainland, such as the internet, telephone, and modern services, took years to appear. Even so, the community resisted and grew stronger. Each generation helped build its own identity, marked by unity, isolation, and pride in living in one of the most remote places in the Atlantic. Number 3. Community and infrastructure. Today, around 400 people live there. There are so few people that practically everyone knows each other by name, knows their neighbors' entire families, and knows exactly who was born, who left, who returned, and who decided to stay forever. Well, the island has half that, and yet it functions as a complete municipality, with a school, city hall, grocery stores, an airstrip, and a health center. Everything is reduced to the essentials, but it works. Instead of houses and buildings, the landscape is dominated by green fields, stone walls, and seemingly endless pastures. In fact, this is where one of the island's best-known curiosities appears. There are more than 800 cows, meaning there are more cows than people. In many places, the scenery is more reminiscent of a large farm surrounded by the sea than a traditional village. The roads are so tiny that there isn't a single traffic light. Here, traffic is regulated by patience and the rule of first come, first served. And we can't forget Porto da Casa, the island's only port. It is small, cramped, surrounded by rocks, and has that typical look of remote islands. This is where supplies, people, stories, and much of the life that keeps the community going arrive. And anyone who thinks that, because there are few people, education is lacking is mistaken. In fact, the opposite is true. The local school has just over 50 students and 22 teachers. That's practically one teacher for every 2 students. It's almost like luxury private education. Classes are small, personalized, and some years there is only 1 student per grade. The advantage? Everyone learns. The disadvantage? You can't cheat on anyone's test. There is also no hospital on the island. What there is a health center where a doctor and staff can take care of basic needs, respond to emergencies, and stabilize any more delicate cases. For complete treatments, major exams, or surgeries, care must continue outside the island. When you combine a very small community with an extremely limited structure, the result is special care with everything related to health. And on the island, this is even more evident when it comes to childbirth. Number 4. You can't be born. As we mentioned earlier, the island has no hospital, and everyone knows that childbirth is no joke. Even when everything goes well, it requires preparation, equipment, support, and constant monitoring. Therefore, when a pregnancy reaches its final months, the standard procedure is for the mother-to-be to be monitored and advised to go to another island where all the necessary resources are available. But that doesn't mean it's impossible to give birth there. It has happened before. Premature births happen anywhere in the world, and when the baby decides to arrive early, the doctor at the health center does whatever is necessary. There is basic equipment to stabilize mother and child, and the team is even trained to deal with these situations. After that, once everything is under control, both are transferred to another island to receive all the necessary care. Number 6. Culture and commerce. If there is one word that defines the cultural life of the island, that word is simplicity. Corvo never pretended to be a cultural metropolis. The charm here lies precisely in the opposite. Everything is small, intimate, and deeply connected to its own history. Even the way of speaking reflects this. The local dialect preserves archaic words from 16th century Portuguese, a direct legacy of centuries of isolation. When it comes to food, there is no mystery. Cheese is the star. With so many cows and such a long agricultural tradition, the island has long produced butter and dairy products in a small cooperative, now defunct. Even so, every household makes its own fresh or aged cheese. It has that rustic flavor that you only find in isolated places, where recipes are passed down from generation to generation with no rush to change. In Porto da Casa, next to the supply arrival area, there is a grocery store that sells a little bit of everything: canned goods, rice, salted meat, and basic everyday items. However, more specific products, grains, brand name medicines, different spices, only appear when a new shipment arrives. And as we mentioned earlier, since this shipment depends on the sea, sometimes the island spends days waiting for the ship to dock. Among the handicrafts, the barrettes stand out, a specific and famous type of handmade wool hat considered local works of art, as well as blankets. Perhaps the most curious item is the wooden locks, a type of handmade latch that you can still find on old doors and that works without a single metal screw. Speaking of locks, they are hardly ever used here. Corvo is so safe that almost no one locks their doors. Visitors comment that sometimes you go in to ask for information and come out with coffee, bread, and half of the family's stories. Number 8. Gastronomy. When hunger strikes, the island follows the same pattern as the rest of local life: simple, straightforward, and no frills. There are 1 or 2 restaurants, nothing too elaborate, with homemade dishes, fresh fish, and food made in the traditional way, without gourmet menus, fancy options, or those 10 versions of coffee that only exist in big cities. The cuisine here is entirely shaped by the land and the sea. One of the classics is the dish couves da barca, prepared with large, firm leaves that grow especially well in volcanic soil. The result is a more intense, greener, and much tastier cabbage than what you find on the mainland. Another highlight is feijão assado a corvo, a rustic recipe that involves beans cooked slowly in the oven, giving them a smoky flavor reminiscent of grandma's cooking. There are also tortas de erva do calho, pebble herb pies, which sound strange by name, but are made with an edible plant that grows among the rocks on the coast. It is a simple delicacy, slightly salty, and totally different from what you find in the rest of the country. Broa de milho, cornbread, is a staple on any table. Made by hand with local corn and a traditional oven, it is denser and moister, perfect to accompany cheese or fish. Speaking of cheese, there is no escaping the island's typical cheese, made at home in small batches with milk, from the cows you see grazing everywhere. It can be fresh or cured, but always with that strong and distinctive flavor that only an isolated place can produce. And for those who like more authentic flavors, there is also molho de figado, a thick mixture made with spices and less noble parts of the animal. It's the kind of food that divides opinion, but which tells an important part of the island's agricultural culture. Number 9. Traditions and legends. If there is one thing that keeps the island's identity alive, even with so few people, it is its traditions. The island's biggest celebration is the feast of Nossa Senhora dos Milagres, the local patron saint, always held on August 15th. On that day, practically everyone gets involved in something. Some set up stalls, others organize the procession, others prepare food. It is a municipal holiday and the whole village is transformed. There is a sung mass, fireworks, food for everyone, and that community atmosphere that only exists where everyone has known each other since childhood. Another strong tradition is the Divino Espirito Santo, typical of the Azores. In July, there are children's coronations, a parade, fireworks, and the traditional pork stew served to the entire community. But no Corvo tradition would be complete without legends, and here they are told as if they had happened yesterday. One of the most beloved is the legend of the Hermitage of Our Lady of Miracles. The story begins in the 16th century, when fishermen from Corvo found a small box floating in the tide. Inside it was an image of Our Lady, worn by the sea, but perfectly preserved. At the base was an enigmatic inscription that read, "Wherever I end up, build me a hermitage," meaning a small church. And that is exactly what the people of Corvo did. They built a small church on top of the rock, facing the sea that brought it. The legend only grew stronger when the image was taken to Lisbon by order of the crown. Days later, strange reports began to emerge that every morning the statue appeared with its mantle wet with salt water. They said that it left at night, crossed the ocean, and returned to its island. The discomfort was so great that they decided to send it back to Corvo, where it was welcomed with a celebration and placed exactly where it wanted to be. Since then, they say, she has protected the residents and performed miracles, and that is enough for no one to doubt her desire to remain there. Another famous story is the legend of the Night of Corvo, one of the oldest and most talked about traditions on the island. It began in the 15th century, when the first navigators venturing across the Atlantic sighted Corvo for the first time. Reports say that as they approached the island, they saw a figure on top of a hill that none of them could immediately explain. It was a statue carved from volcanic basalt, with a horse rearing up on its hind legs and the rider pointing his sword to the northwest, as if indicating the direction of the New World. The position was so symbolic that, for many, it seemed like a sign left by lost civilizations or by peoples who had arrived there long before the Portuguese. The figure was so impressive that it ended up catching the attention of the kingdom. It was reportedly removed from the island by order of Manuel, King of Portugal, to be taken to the court. However, during the voyage, the ship carrying the statue sank, taking with it the only physical evidence that this figure ever existed. Since then, only ancient descriptions, word of mouth, and records that appear in chronicles of the time remain. And that's all for today. But what about you? Did you already know about this island? What did you think of this story? What surprised you most about this unique place? Tell us in the comments. And before you leave, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell so you don't miss any episodes of our Bello Mundo, and try using the new Hype video feature. It really helps the channel reach more people and continue bringing you different content like this. See you next time.